Welcome everyone to a meeting of the Boston Region Metropolitan Planning Organization. I'm David Moeller, representing Secretary Jamie Tesler here. All participants will join the meeting. Please rename yourself to include your first name, last name, and affiliation if you have one. Please do not unmute and mute yourself. To participate in the discussion, please select the raise hand function. Find this by clicking either on the participants button at the bottom of the screen, and a window will pop up with a raise hand button at the bottom, or the reactions button in the toolbar. The chair will then call on participants. If you are on the phone, you can use *9 to raise your hand. If you have any technical difficulties, please contact Rosine Foley via the chat box at rfoley@ctps.org or call her at 857-702-3704. This meeting is accessible to people with disabilities. Zoom products are compliant with exceptions with the following standards: Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1 Level AA standards and revised Section 508 standards. If you require any additional accommodations in order to participate fully in this meeting, please contact Rosine Foley of the MPO staff at rfoley@ctps.org or call her at 857-702-3704. So, Jonathan, could you please call the roll?
Certainly, Mr. Chair. MassDOT Chair.
This is David Moeller. I'm here.
Thank you. MassDOT Seat 2.
John Bouchard, representing Highway Administrator Jonathan Gulliver. Here.
Thank you. Mass DOT Highway Division.
John Romano here.
MBTA.
Julian Linnell on behalf of General Manager Poftak.
Thank you. Massport.
Hi, this is Sarah Lee, representing Massport.
Thank you. MAPC.
Good morning. This is Eric Barassa with the Metropolitan Area Planning Council.
Thank you. MBTA Advisory Board.
Good morning. Amir Patterson, representing the MBTA Advisory Board on behalf of Brian Kane.
Thank you. Regional Transportation Advisory Council.
Leonard Diggins, Advisory Council Chair here.
Thank you. City of Boston BTD.
Bill Conroy here, representing the City of Boston and representing Mayor Kim Janey.
Thank you. City of Boston BPDA.
Hi, Jim Fitzgerald with BPDA representing Mayor Janey, City of Boston.
Thank you. At-large City of Everett.
Jay Monty representing Mayor DeMaria and the City of Everett.
Thank you. Large City of Newton.
Good morning, David Kozis representing Mayor Ruth Ann Fuller and the City of Newton.
Thank you. At-large Town of Arlington.
Daniel Amseth, Town of Arlington, representing Select Board Chair Steve DeCourcy.
Thank you. At-large Town of Brookline.
Todd Crane, representing Select Board Chair Heather Hamilton and the Town of Brookline.
Thank you. Intercore Committee, City of Somerville.
Good morning, Brad Rawson, City of Somerville, representing the Intercore Committee and Mayor Joe Curtatone.
Thank you. Minuteman Advisory Group on Interlocal Coordination, Town of Acton.
Good morning, Austin Steganowitz, Town of Acton, representing the Magic Subregion.
Thank you. Metro West Regional Collaborative, City of Framingham.
Erica Oliver Jerem, representing the Metro West Regional Collaborative and on behalf of Mayor Spicer, City of Framingham.
Thank you. North Shore Task Force, City of Beverly.
Good morning, Darlene Nguyen, representing Mayor Michael Cahill on behalf of the North Shore Task Force.
Thank you. North Suburban Planning Council, City of Woburn.
Good morning, Tina Cassidy, representing Woburn Mayor Scott Galvin and the North Suburban Planning Council.
Thank you. South Shore Coalition, Town of Rockland.
Jen Constable, Town of Rockland for the South Shore Coalition.
Thank you. Southwest Advisory Planning Committee, Town of Medway. Okay, and Three Rivers Interlocal Council, Town of Norwood, Neponset River Regional Chamber.
Good morning, Tom O'Rourke from the town of Norwood, representing the Trick subregion.
Thank you. And our ex officio members, Federal Highway Administration.
Good morning, Ken Miller, Federal Highway.
And Federal Transit Administration. That calls the roll, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jonathan. Next item on the agenda is the chair's report. I don't have one, so we'll go directly to the executive director's report. Jagan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a few things to cover today, announcements, some outreach updates, and then sort of what we're covering today. So please bear with me. I'm Tegan Syke, Executive Director of the MPO staff. One thing I wanted to share first with all of you board members and anyone else listening is that we are engaging in quite a bit of recruitment at the moment. We do have a new project accountant starting next week, which will be a great help to us. And we just closed on a posting for a manager of outreach and communications. But we are currently still recruiting for a public outreach coordinator, a transportation planner that would also manage our UPWP program, and a transportation planner that's more on the side of data analysis that would support our transit and other work at the agency. So these jobs are, the postings are closing later this month or early November, and I'd love to just encourage you all to send folks our way to take a look. And we will likely be having a few other jobs in the coming months as well that we will be posting. So please keep an eye out and help us out. Please recruit great people. And then we have a number of outreach updates I'd like to share with all of you. So first of all, something we'll actually cover more next meeting, but wanted to let you know that the recommendations that you made for addressing the TIP project cost changes had been out for public review until this past Monday, that was October 14th. And we only received 3 written comments, and they were all generally supportive, but we also heard a number of other informal comments that we heard from participants that were joining us in our open house. So we will talk about these more at the next MPO meeting in advance of, after bringing them to the TIP Project Cost Committee, which is today, following today's MPO meeting. So look for more on that. 2 other events that we talked about I wanted to mention. First of all, we had our second virtual travel demand management forum of this year, and that was on last Thursday, September 30th. And we had a panel of experts there that discussed how to establish an equitable framework for TDM policies. It was a really interesting conversation. The discussion touched on things like thinking beyond the 9-to-5 commute, whether TDM policies right now are too focused on the white collar style of commuting, and how RPAs or regional planning agencies can help facilitate more equitable approaches to implementing TDM policies. So it had over 150 attendees. If you weren't able to attend, we heard lots of great feedback. Please feel free to go and watch on our YouTube site. And then we also had a meeting from the Transit Working Group on Tuesday, October 12th. And we had a really great main speaker who was Sarah Klein. She's a Washington, DC area transit policy expert. And she shared with us the implications of the recent and the upcoming federal legislation that's coming through and its impact on transit. So it was a really interesting conversation. It gave us some great perspective. We also heard from Ellie McCarthy from MassDOT's Rail and Transit Division about their RTA, or Regional Transit Authority discretionary grant program. And then we also heard from MEPC staff about this round of their taxi cab livery and Hackney Transportation Partnership Grants program. So if you're interested in any of those topics, also please go to our YouTube channel. You can always watch the event there. Looking forward, we will also be hosting a number more of the Transit Working Group coffee chat coming up. So these are the smaller group kind of topic focused conversations. Please keep an eye out for notices. And if you're interested in learning more about what's happening with the Transit Working Group, please reach out now to Sandy Johnston, who is now managing that group. We also wanted to highlight, lastly, that there's quite a bit of fall sub-regional outreach going on right now. So each year we visit, the MPO staff visits the MAPC subregions at their hosted fall meetings. And we do this from October through December. And what MPO staff does is talk about the TIP funding opportunities, the UPWP study ideas, and any other studies that we think might be relevant, technical assistance. And then we also start to talk about the needs for the subregion, the transportation needs that will inform our needs assessment for the Long Range Transportation Plan, or the LRTP, that we are kicking off today. So far, we've already met with Minuteman Advisory Group on interlocal coordination, that's MAGIC. We've met with the Inner Core Committee, and we've met with the Three Rivers Interlocal Council, that's TRIC. And then upcoming, we will be joining the sub-regional meetings for Metro West Regional Collaborative, North Shore Task Force, Southwest Advisory Planning Committee, South Shore Coalition, and North Suburban Planning Council. So if you have any of those subregions and would like to attend, please do. If you represent any of those subregions, please encourage folks in your subregion to attend and to weigh in on the conversation. So that's our outreach. There's a lot going on right now. Today, we also have a lot going on. We actually have 7 action items today. So I just wanted to call your attention to that. We do have 4 work scopes, 3 are MPO funded, and 1 is an MBTA funded scope. So we'll go through those, I believe, first. And then we'll ask for your vote to approve the release of the federal fiscal year 22, that's the current UPWP amendment for a 21-day public review period, and Sandy will discuss that with you. We also will ask you to endorse the public outreach program, the MPO's plan for how we engage all stakeholders in the transportation planning process. That has been out for public review. We'll ask you to endorse it. And if you haven't already, please do take a look at the accompanying guidebook, which is a new tool that staff created to make the content more accessible and digestible. And always feel free to give us feedback. And then we'll also have a conversation about the Community Connections program after we've done some follow-up and outreach to the regional transit authorities. So we'll ask you to take a vote on the next steps for that program. And then the main topic, other than those action items, are, as I mentioned, the kickoff for our long-range transportation plan. I just really want to emphasize this, especially for new folks. We're calling this a kickoff, but this is work that we're doing all the time, really, between implementing the current long-range plan and moving on to developing the next long-range plan, roughly every 4 years. So right now we have about 2 years of ramped up work that we're going to be doing, where we'll be working with the board to look into the vision and the goals that are established in the plan, which are what really guide all of your decisions about the investments that you make, that you decide to make in the region's transportation system. So please, join us in this kickoff. And if you have any questions about it, never hesitate to reach out to staff. And we're looking forward to having this conversation today and many more to come. Lastly, for the next MPO meeting, I just want to highlight for you that we will likely talk about endorsing, as I mentioned, the TIP project cost recommendations after the discussion at the subcommittee today. And then we also will likely talk about the study that we did that's going to inform how we do exploratory scenario planning for the LRTP, and that's the informing the big ideas behind the scenario planning process study. So we hope to see you next time as well. Thanks, Mr. Chair. That's it.
Thank you, Tegan. Any questions from the members for Tegan? Seeing and hearing none. Next item on the agenda is public comments. Are there any comments from the public at this time? Seeing none. If you have a comment during the meeting, please raise your hand and we will call on you. Next item is we have a couple. So Derek Schuster, or Derek Cravat, you want to go first for UPWP?
Yes, thank you. So I will just let the members know the UPWP committee did meet this morning and voted to recommend that the MPO release for public comment the federal fiscal year 2022 UPWP amendment that Tegan had just mentioned. I also wanted to let MPO members know that I will be taking over as the sort of permanent MassDOT liaison to the Boston MPO within MassDOT's Office of Transportation Planning. So if any members have MassDOT related questions, I will be serving as that sort of first point of contact within OTP. So that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Derek. Is there any other committee chairs reports at this time? Seeing and hearing none. Next item is the Regional Transportation Advisory Council report. Lynn?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We had a very good meeting on last Wednesday, and at that meeting, we had Alexis Walls from the Massachusetts Public Health Association and Enrique Pepin from Transportation of Massachusetts. They were talking to us about regional transportation advancement bill that's been filed in this session of the legislature. And even though we don't do advocacy, I mean, we just really wanted to get a good sense of what they felt about the needs for support of the RTAs, and it was very enlightening. And it does make me wonder what more maybe the advisory council can do, and the MPO, not only the Boston region, but others, to help the RTAs become more aware of resources that are available to them, and of course, support them as individuals, in trying to get more resources for the RTAs. So I'm very happy to hear about, well, first off, that Sandy's just staying with us, but that he's going to be working with the transit group, because I think he can give us some insights into this. And also, the day after the meeting, I was kicked out of the Screen Actors Guild because I did apparently inadequate job of playing the role of Matt Genova in presenting the our project cost containment plan, but I did my best, and out of that, though, I'll say there's nothing quite like trying to present someone else's material. First off, it made me even more impressed with what Matt has done, and also it made me pay more close attention to it, and I got some insights out of that, and I'll be saving that for the meeting after this. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Lynn. Next item is the approval of the minutes of August 19th and September 2nd. We'll take them one at a time. So can I get a motion in a second to approve the minutes of August 19th? Please state your name for the record. Daniel Amstutz.
Move approval of the minutes.
Thank you. Is there a second? Darlene Nguyen.
I second.
Thank you. Motion has been made and seconded. Are there any comments, changes, questions, or suggestions? Seeing none, Jonathan, please call the roll.
David Moeller,
Yes.
John Bouchard,
John Bouchard, yes.
John Romano,
John Romano, yes.
Jillian Linnell,
Jillian Linnell, yes.
Sarah Lee,
I wasn't present for that meeting, so I don't think I should vote on it.
okay. Eric Barassa,
Eric Barassa, yes.
Myra Patterson,
Mayor Patterson, yes.
Leonard Diggins,
Leonard Diggins, yes.
Bill Conroy,
Bill Conroy, yes.
Jim Fitzgerald,
Jim Fitz, yes.
Jay Monty,
Jay Monty, yes.
David Kozis,
David Kozis, yes.
Daniel Amstutz,
Daniel Amstutz, yes.
Todd Corain,
Todd Corain, yes.
Brad Rawson,
Brad Rawson, yes.
Austin Saganowitz,
Austin Siganowicz, yes.
Erica Oliver Jerem,
Erica Jerem, I abstain.
Darlene Nguyen,
Darlene Nguyen, yes.
Tina Cassidy,
Tina Cassidy, yes.
Jennifer Constable,
Jennifer Constable, yes.
and Tom O'Rourke.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
Motion carries, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jonathan. Can I get a motion in a second to approve the minutes of September 2nd? Please state your name for the record when making your motion. Eric Barassa.
Yes, Eric Barassa, MAPC. I make a motion to approve those minutes.
Is there a second? Darlene Nguyen.
Darlene Nguyen seconds.
Thank you. Motion having been made and seconded. Are there any comments, changes, questions, or suggestions? Seeing and hearing none, Jonathan, please call the roll.
David Moeller,
Yes.
John Bouchard,
John Bouchard, yes.
John Romano,
John Romano, yes.
Julian Linnell,
Jillian Linnell, yes.
Sarah Lee,
I was not present at the meeting or an MPO board member, so I'm not going to vote.
Eric Barassa,
Eric Barassa, yes.
Amira Patterson,
Mayor Patterson, yes.
Leonard Diggins,
Leonard Diggins, yes.
Bill Conroy,
Bill Conroy, yes.
Jim Fitzgerald,
Jim Fitz, yes.
Jay Monty,
Jay Monty, yes.
David Kozis,
David Kozis, yes.
Daniel Amstutz,
Daniel Amstutz, yes.
Todd Corain,
Todd Corain, yes.
Brad Rawson,
Brad Rawson, yes.
Austin Siganowitz,
Austin Spiganowitz, yes.
Erica Jerem,
Erica Jerem, abstain.
Darlene Nguyen,
Darlene Nguyen votes yes.
Tina Cassidy,
Tina Cassidy votes yes.
Jennifer Constable,
Jennifer Constable, yes.
and Tom O'Rourke.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
Motion carries, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, John. Next item on the agenda is an action item, the approval of a work scope for addressing priority corridors from the Long Range Transportation Plan Needs Assessment for fiscal year 2022. Seth Asante, whenever you're ready, Seth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning. My name is Seth Asante, and I'll be presenting this work program. The Priority Corridor Study addresses arterial segments identified in the needs assessment of the Long Range Transportation Plan as in need of safety improvements and modernization to address congestion, multimodal transportation, and complete street issues. MPO staff have conducted several priority corridor studies, and the communities and MASDOT like these studies because they provide them at the conceptual level what will be required to address deficiencies in the corridors before committing design and engineering funds to a roadway improvement project. In the past, MPO staff have conducted priority corridor studies for Route 203 in Boston, Route 1A in Lynn and Swampscott, Route 138 in Canton and Milton, Route 16 in Chelsea and Everett, and Route 28 in Milton. Many of the short-term improvements have been implemented, and some have advanced onto the MASDOT project information database. The objectives of the priority corridor study are to select an arterial segment from those listed in the Long Range Transportation Plan needs assessment, using a set of selection criteria, including safety, congestion, and multimodal transportation, to identify the transportation-related problems and needs of the corridor, and develop multimodal and complete street solutions to the problem and needs. This work program has 7 tasks included: to establish an advisory task force to guide the study, to collect data for analysis, analyze the data to identify the problems and the corridor needs, develop and recommend improvements, and also document the results of the study and present it to the MPO board. This is a 3C funded work and has a budget of $145,000 and will take 10 months to complete. The priority corridor study meets the MPO goal of addressing safety, capacity management and mobility, system preservation, and economic vitality. Thank you.
Thank you, Seth. Can I get a motion and a second to approve? Please state your name for the record when making the motion. Eric Barassa.
Yes, Eric Barassa, MAPC. I make a motion to approve this work scope.
Thank you. Is there a second? Leonard Diggins.
I second.
Thank you. Any questions for Seth before we take our vote? Eric Barassa, you got a question?
Yes, Seth, I can't remember, and I apologize if you mentioned this. Have you already identified the locations, or is that the next step after we approve this? You will work to identify the proposed locations and then narrow one down?
Yeah, we haven't selected it, but that is what we are working on in the current priority corridor that we are studying. So as part of that study, we are also identifying the location that we will study for federal fiscal year 2022.
Good, thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, motion has been made and seconded. Jonathan, please call the roll.
David Moeller,
Yes.
John Bouchard,
John Bouchard, yes.
John Romano,
John Romano, yes.
Jillian Linnell,
Jane Linnell, yes.
Sarah Lee,
Sarah Lee, yes.
Eric Barassa,
Eric Barassa, yes.
Amira Patterson,
Amira Patterson, yes.
Leonard Diggins,
Leonard Diggins, yes.
Bill Conroy, Jim Fitzgerald, Jay Monty,
Jay Monty, yes.
David Kozis,
David Kozis, yes.
Daniel Amstutz,
Daniel Amstutz, yes.
Todd Corain,
Todd Corain, yes.
Brad Rawson,
Brad Rawson, yes.
Austin Saganowitz,
Austin Saganowitz, yes.
Erica Jerem,
Erica Jerem votes yes.
Darlene Nguyen,
Darlene Nguyen votes yes.
Tina Cassidy,
Tina Cassidy votes yes.
Jennifer Constable,
Jennifer Constable, yes.
Tom O'Rourke.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
And I'll quickly go back. Bill Conroy, and Jim Fitzgerald. Motion carries, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jonathan. Next item on the agenda is an action item for the work scope for addressing safety, mobility, and access on sub-regional priority roadways for FY 2022. Chin Wan Wang, whenever you're ready.
Good morning. My name is Zhen Yan Wang, MPO staff. This federal fiscal year is the 10th year that we will perform this work program. It was initiated in 2013 to complement the long-range transportation plan priority corridor, so as to focus on the arterial and the collector roadways that are not identified as LRTP priority corridors. Through the input from the MPO sub-regional outreaches, this work program aims to address safety, mobility, and access on the sub-regional priority roadway for all roadway users, including people who walk, bike, and take public transportation, people who deliver goods and services, and the owner of the adjacent properties and the businesses. The study has been well received by the municipalities and the MPO district offices. Several locations from previous study have been met projects and are currently under design or out for bids, such as Route 3A in Cohasset, Route 20 in Marlborough, and the Summer Rockland Street in Hingham. Municipalities also started the design process for locations in their study corridors, such as Main Street in Medford and the downtown area in Renton. Currently, we are completing the FFY 2021 study for the Grove Street corridor in Braintree. And we are in the process of selecting a location for this fiscal year. And this work program includes 7 major tasks similar to the LRTP priority corridor that Seth just presented. The estimated budget is $133,000 and is scheduled to complete it in 10 months. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from the members? Seeing and hearing none, can I get a motion to approve as presented today, and please state your name for the record? Eric Barassa.
Eric Barassa with MAPC. I make a motion to approve this work scope.
Daniel Amstutz.
Daniel Amstutz, Town of Arlington, seconds that motion.
Thank you. Motion having been made and seconded. Jonathan, please call the roll.
David Muller,
Yes.
John Bouchard,
John Bouchard, yes.
John Romano,
John Romano, yes.
Jillian Linnell,
Jillian Linnell, yes.
Sarah Lee,
Sarah Lee, yes.
Eric Barassa,
Eric Barassa, yes.
Amira Patterson,
Mayor Patterson, yes.
Leonard Diggins,
Leonard Diggins, yes.
Bill Conroy,
Bill Conroy, yes.
Jim Fitzgerald,
Jim Fitzgerald, yes.
Dave Monte,
Jay Monte, yes.
David Kozis,
David Kozis, yes.
Daniel Amstutz,
Daniel Amstutz, yes.
Todd Corain,
Todd Corain, yes.
Brad Rawson,
Brad Rawson, yes.
Austin Saganowitz,
Austin Saganowitz, yes.
Erica Jerem,
Erica Jerem, yes.
Darlene Nguyen,
Darlene Nguyen, yes.
Tina Cassidy,
Tina Cassidy, yes.
Jennifer Constable,
Jennifer Constable, yes.
and Tom O'Rourke.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
Motion carries unanimous, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jonathan. Next item on the agenda is an action item for a work scope on safety and operations at selected intersections for FY 2022. Asante.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is Seth again. Good morning. The safety and operations study builds on recommendation generated by the MPO congestion management process, evaluation of crash data, and input from the MPO outreach process to address safety and operations at problem intersections. Since 2008, MPO staff have conducted several safety and operation studies, and they have received favorable responses from the municipalities. Municipalities in the MPO region are receptive to this type of study as it gives them low-cost solution and a head start on conceptual designs for intersections that need safety improvements and congestion mitigation. Many of the recommendations from the safety and operation studies have been constructed or programmed on the tip or have advanced onto the MassDOT project information database. They are spread throughout the MPO region. The objectives of the safety and operation study will be to identify improvements that address safety and operation problems at as many as 3 intersections in the MPO region. This work program has 7 tasks, and they are similar to the priority corridors and also sub-regional priority corridors. It is also a 3C funded work and has a budget of $82,000 and will take 10 months to complete. The study meets the MPO goals of addressing safety, capacity management and mobility, system preservation, and economic vitality. Thank you.
Thank you, Seth. Any questions for Seth from the members? Seeing none, can we, oh wait, there's a question. Brad Rawson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just like to say thank you to staff and voice my support for this work task. I think it's of crucial importance. This MPO has done a great job of learning about the International Vision Zero framework, which is a strategic and equity-based commitment to eliminating crashes with severe consequences. And I think that this really builds well on the work and the research staff have been doing. I also want to point out, Mr. Chairman, that I'm grateful that this scope includes capacity building, alternatives analysis, and conceptual design work by in-house CTPS staff. I think that reflects the great capacity building that we as a group have been doing, board and staff. So fully support this, and I'm excited to support the team's work.
Thank you, Brad. You want to go ahead and make the motion since you're on speaker anyway?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Brad Rawson moves to approve.
Thank you. Is there a second? Eric Barassa.
Eric Barassa, MAPC. I second that motion.
Thank you. Jonathan, motion has been made and seconded. Please call the roll.
David Moeller,
Yes.
John Bouchard,
John Bouchard, yes.
John Romano,
John Romano, yes.
Jillian Linnell,
Jillian Linnell, yes.
Sarah Lee,
Sarah Lee, yes.
Eric Barassa,
Eric Barassa, yes.
Amira Patterson,
Amira Patterson, yes.
Leonard Diggins,
Leonard Diggins, yes.
Bill Conroy,
Bill Conroy, yes.
Jim Fitzgerald,
Jim Fitzgerald, yes.
Jay Monty,
Jay Monty, yes.
David Kozis,
David Kozis, yes.
Daniel Amstutz,
Daniel Amstutz, yes.
Todd Corain,
Todd Corain, yes.
Brad Rawson,
Brad Rawson votes yes.
Austin Saganowitz,
Austin Saganowitz, yes.
Erica Jerem,
Erica Jerem, yes.
Darlene Nguyen,
Darlene Nguyen, yes.
Tina Cassidy,
Tina Cassidy, yes.
Jennifer Constable,
Jennifer Constable, yes.
and Tom O'Rourke.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
Motion carries unanimous, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jonathan. Next item on the agenda is the work scope for the MBTA 2022 Title VI program monitoring. Bradley Putnam.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everyone. I'm here to present the work scope for MBTA 2022 Title VI program monitoring. CTPS has been assisting the MBTA with their Title VI monitoring work for many years, and this work scope represents a continuation of that work. The budget is $79,700, and the MBTA will pay for this work. The schedule for the project is 2 years. The reason why the schedule is 2 years is to ensure continuity in providing technical support to the MBTA. Every 3 years, the MBTA is required to submit a report to the Federal Transit Administration detailing the MBTA's efforts to comply with Title VI, the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The purpose of the Title VI report is to ensure that the MBTA provides a comparable level and quality of transportation services to all customers without regard to race, color, or national origin. CTPS completed the MBTA's most recent triennial Title VI report in 2020, and the next one will be due in 2023. For years in which the MBTA does not submit a triennial report, the Federal Transit Administration requires the MBTA to complete annual service monitoring and internal reporting to identify and address potential disparities and to ensure ongoing compliance with Title VI. And so the scope before you today is for annual service monitoring for the calendar year 2022. In this project, CTPS will compile and analyze 10 categories of MBTA service data, such as vehicle load, on-time performance, and the distribution of amenities at transit stations. The modes that these data will cover are bus, heavy and light rail, and commuter rail. The final product of this work will be a technical memorandum to the MBTA with the results of the data analysis. Again, CTPS has been assisting the MBTA with their Title VI monitoring work for many years, and this work scope represents a continuation of that work. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have, but otherwise I'd like to ask you please vote to approve this scope. Thank you.
Thank you, Bradley. Any questions? Seeing none, can I get a motion and a second from a member to approve as presented? And please state your name for the record. Lynn Diggins.
Lynn Diggins, Advisory Council. I'd like to make a motion to approve this work scope.
Eric Barassa.
Eric Barassa, I second that motion.
Thank you. Motion has been made and seconded. Jonathan, please call the roll.
David Moeller,
Yes.
John Bouchard,
John Bouchard, yes.
John Romano,
John Romano, yes.
Jillian Linnell,
Jillian Linnell, yes.
Sarah Lee,
Sarah Lee, yes.
Eric Barassa,
Eric Barassa, yes.
Amira Patterson,
Mayor Patterson, yes.
Leonard Diggins,
Leonard Diggins, yes.
Bill Conroy,
Bill Conroy, yes.
Jim Fitzgerald,
Jim Fitzgerald, yes.
Jay Monty,
Jay Monty, yes.
David Kozas,
David Kozis, yes.
Daniel Amstutz,
Daniel Amstutz, yes.
Todd Corain,
Todd Corain, yes.
Brad Rawson,
Brad Rawson, yes.
Austin Saganowitz,
Austin Zaganowitz, yes.
Erica Jerem,
Erica Jerem, yes.
Darlene Nguyen,
Darlene Nguyen, yes.
Tina Cassidy,
Tina Cassidy, yes.
Jennifer Constable,
Jennifer Constable, yes.
and Tom O'Rourke.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
Motion carries unanimous, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jonathan. Next item on the agenda is an action item for UPWP Amendment Number 1 for FY 2022. Sandy Johnston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am here today to ask for your approval to release Amendment 1 to the current federal fiscal year 2022 UPWP for public comment. The UPWP committee met this morning to discuss this amendment and, as you heard from Derek Cravat earlier, voted to recommend that the MPO release it for public comment. The amendment extends $45,000 in unused FFY 2021 combined 3C funds for two major purposes related to the MPO's and CTPS's strategic goals. $20,000 will be used for new skill development early in federal fiscal year 22, with a focus on preparing staff to implement a new suite of modeling tools. A light load of non-MPO funded project work at the beginning of this fiscal year creates staff availability and presents an opportunity to immediately and efficiently use these extended funds without affecting use of fiscal year 22 funds. $25,000 will be extended and transferred from labor and overhead to direct costs. These funds will be used to procure support from Caliper, the developer of the travel demand software TransCAD that staff use. Caliper's support provides a one-time opportunity to accelerate the development of the next phase of travel demand modeling tools. Overall, the amendment increases the FFY 2022 UPWP budget by $45,000. Because the funds being used are extended FFY 2021 funds, there's no negative impact to work programmed in the FFY 2022 UPWP. The amendment also makes several minor typo corrections and textual corrections, such as inserting project ID numbers where they had previously been left TBD. There are several accompanying materials to help explain this amendment, and they are posted to the MPO meeting calendar. There's a short memo summarizing the process, reasoning, and need behind the amendment, which includes a table summarizing the changes that staff are asking to make. There's an updated version of the FFY 22 UPWP as it would be if this amendment were to be endorsed, and there is a marked up redlined version of the FFY 2022 UPWP showing where changes have been made. I and other staff are happy to field any questions you may have about this process or about the specifics. If you're satisfied, we request that you release this amendment to the fiscal year 22 UPWP for a 21-day public comment period as specified in the new public outreach plan also being voted on today.
Excellent. Thank you, Sandy. Any questions? Seeing none, can I get a motion to release this for a 21-day public comment period as presented today? And please state your name for the record. Eric Barassa.
Eric Barassa, I make a motion to release this for a 21 public comment period as presented today.
Thank you. Lynn Diggins.
Leonard Diggins Advisory Council seconds the motion.
Thank you. Motion has been made and seconded. Jonathan, please call the roll.
David Moeller,
Yes.
John Bouchard,
John Bouchard, yes.
John Romano,
John Romano, yes.
Jillian Linnell,
Jillian Linnell, yes.
Sarah Lee,
Sarah Lee, yes.
Eric Barassa,
Eric Barassa, yes.
Amira Patterson,
Amir Patterson, yes.
Leonard Diggins,
Leonard Diggins, yes.
Bill Conroy,
Bill Conroy, yes.
Jim Fitzgerald,
Sorry, I meant to comment real quick. Sorry to interrupt the flow, but I just wanted to say how important this work is and how much we support and have been supporting it over the years. So very excited to vote yes for this because it's really helpful tools that the staff is working on. So sorry. Thank you. Yes.
thank you. Jay Monty,
Jay Monty, yes.
David Kozis,
David Kozis, yes.
Daniel Amstutz,
Daniel Amstutz, yes.
Todd Corain,
Todd Corain, yes.
Brad Rossin,
Brad Rawson, yes.
Austin Saganowitz, Erica Jerem,
Erica Jerem, I vote yes.
Darlene Nguyen,
Darlene Nguyen votes yes.
Tina Cassidy,
Tina Cassidy votes yes.
Jennifer Constable,
Jennifer Constable, yes.
Tom O'Rourke,
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
and I'll go back quickly, Austin Saganowitz. Motion carries, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jonathan. Next item on the agenda is an action item to approve the MPO public outreach plan. Jonathan Church.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. As you may recall, the MPO's public outreach plan was released for public review at the MPO's August 19th meeting. Now that public comment period is closed, I'm here to ask your endorsement of the MPO's updated public outreach plan. To remind you, the POP guides our efforts to ensure everyone has access to the transportation planning process. The POP covers the full range of opportunities for members of the public to shape transportation decision-making in the region, from MPO meetings to in-person and online forums, digital communications, and pop-up outreach events. Recognizing the impact of COVID-19, the updated POP focuses on virtual public involvement opportunities and guidelines and states the principles that the MPO has committed to for all public outreach activities. Further, the staff also created a guidebook separate from the plan to make the content more accessible and understandable for the public. As I mentioned, the MPO voted to release the draft for public comment at August 19th meeting for a 45-day public comment period, which ran from Monday, August 23rd through Wednesday, October 6th. We received 3 comments on the document. The first was from Christopher Casa, who supported the updated POP and in particular the use of virtual sessions and webinars going forward. The second comment we received was from Stephanie Grohl with the City of Cambridge. She encouraged changing the word outreach to engagement throughout the plan and guidebook as it reciprocates public involvement. We agree with engagement is a more apt terminology, and we will update the plan and guidebook to reflect this going forward. She is also encouraged to see that we include basic demographics to make sure that all persons are heard. She specifically suggested that we add American-born Black people as a selection answer as they experience life differently from Black immigrants. Tracking demographics of the people we are engaging with is extremely important, and we have included demographic information collected in all surveys in section 2.4 of the plan. The suggestion about differentiating between American-born Black people and recent Black immigrants is not one that the MPO has heard in the past. However, we will look into this option for better representing and respecting the experience of people in the region. Final comments were submitted by the 495 Metro West Partnership, who supported the use of public participation plan or a different document titled to differentiate the plan from the public outreach program to avoid confusion. This is something we can keep in mind for the future when branding the program and the plan together. The partnership also believes the MPO's YouTube platform could also serve to convey brief informational videos designed to simplify complex planning processes, such as breaking down differences between the TIP and STIP, or visually accentuating principles outlined in the POP guidebook. We also agree with that video is a great tool for engagement, and as we're in the process of hiring a manager of communications and outreach, as well as a public outreach coordinator, these are things that we will hope to explore in the future. Finally, the partnership believes that the public engagement schedule for the TIP should include greater transparency and engagement involving infrastructure projects. We also are always looking for ways to improve transparency through the TIP process. And this is a major issue that the proposed new TIP project cost policies were created to address. All commenters received a response from the MPO staff. The content of the POP will be updated based on these comments, specifically, as I mentioned, the outreach to engagement to increase capacity. Should you choose to endorse the document, it will then go to Mass DOT for review and then on to our federal partners at Federal Highway Administration and Federal Transit Administration. I'm happy to take questions at this time. If there are none, I respectfully request that you vote to endorse the MPO's public outreach plan.
Thank you, John. Questions from the members? Lynn Diggin.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I mean, the comments were great, and I just love it when the public takes the time to comment, and this was a particularly good set, I thought. And the comments about recent immigrant Blacks versus Blacks who have been here, I mean, from generations as a result of generations of slavery is apt. I figured the response was going to be that we can't do that because we are following designations that have been prescribed by the feds. Because the reason I felt that, I thought that was because when I made a comment a while ago about the use of the word sex instead of gender, I was told, well, that's what the feds use, and so we're not going to use gender. So that leads me to my question. When we ask questions regarding sex, it is still sex, right? And we only have 2 designations, male and female?
I believe that is correct.
Okay, and so we're locked into that, right?
Yes, and as I said, this is something we'll look into, but we'll see whether or not it can be done.
Yeah, that's all. Thanks.
Okay,
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lynn. Daniel Amstutz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think what I wanted to say was about the engagement versus outreach. I thought that was a good comment by Stephanie Grohl. I don't know if that means, so throughout the document, does that mean you will rename this like the public engagement plan? I kind of like PEP as a good acronym for this, only slightly joking. But I was just curious about that aspect of it.
Yes, we will be replacing outreach with engagement, so this will become the public engagement plan.
Great, thanks.
Any other?
David, you are muted at the moment.
I don't know how that happened. Rosine Foley.
Hi, yes, sorry. I just wanted to clarify that the demographic questions that we ask while doing public outreach, we do actually have more options for gender identity. The question that we ask right now, and this is the one that we use on all surveys, post-event surveys, and when we're tracking our outreach efforts, is how do you identify by gender? And the options are man, woman, non-binary, and prefer to self-describe. So we actually do allow more options, Len. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you, Rosine. Other questions or comments? Seeing none, can I get a motion in a second to approve as presented today? Lynn Diggins.
I'm so looking forward to going to my first pep rally, so I motion to approve this.
Thank you, Lynn. Eric Barassa.
Eric Barassa, I second that motion.
Motion having been made and seconded. Jonathan, please call the roll.
David Moeller,
Yes.
John Bouchard,
John Bouchard, yes.
John Romano,
John Romano, yes.
Jillian Linnell,
Jillian Linnell, yes.
Sarah Lee,
Sarah Lee, yes.
Eric Barassa,
Eric Barassa, yes.
Amira Patterson,
Amira Patterson, yes.
Leonard Diggins,
Leonard Diggins, yes.
Bill Conroy,
Bill Conroy, yes.
Jim Fitzgerald,
Jim Fitzgerald, yes.
Jay Monty,
Jay Monty, yes.
David Kozis,
David Kozis, yes.
Daniel Amstutz,
Daniel Amstutz, yes.
Todd Corain,
Todd Corain, yes.
Brad Rosson,
Brad Rawson, yes.
Austin Siganowitz,
Austin Siganowicz, yes.
Erica Jerem,
Erica Jerem, yes.
Darlene Nguyen,
Darlene Nguyen, yes.
Tina Cassidy,
Tina Cassidy, yes.
Jennifer Constable,
Jennifer Constable, yes.
and Tom O'Rourke.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
Motion carries unanimous, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jonathan. Next item on the agenda is another action item on the Community Connections Program update. Matt Genova.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, everyone. Today, I'm here to provide an update on the MPO's Community Connections Program. This will continue a conversation that began last month at the MPO meeting on September 2nd. So here's the ground that I'll cover in the presentation. I'll start by highlighting the main goals for today's discussion, followed by a refresher on the Community Connections Program itself. I'll then review the challenges with the program's current structure, as well as some recommendations for addressing them. This content will largely be a review of what was covered last time. Since our last conversation, MPO staff have gotten feedback from some key stakeholders on these recommendations, and so I'll spend some time going over that before winding down the presentation with our key decision points for the day, next steps, and a discussion on all of the above. So what are we really here to talk about today? So much like last time, our goal for today is really to determine the future of the Community Connections program now that we are 2 years into the program and have some idea of how things are working. This includes discussing both the types of projects that are funded, as well as the approach to administering these projects to make them happen. Before we proceed with the presentation, I do want to emphasize that any decisions that are made on the future of the program will not impact projects that have already been selected for funding under the Community Connections banner. Decisions today will only impact future funding rounds. So starting with a quick reminder on the basics of the Community Connections program. The Community Connections program is one of the Boston Region MPO's 6 investment programs, which are the 6 different funding buckets established by this body's current long-range transportation plan, Destination 2040. This program funds first and last mile connections and other small non-traditional projects that help promote mobility in the region. These projects can include everything from bicycle racks and transit signal priority equipment to microtransit operations. We'll come back to a deeper discussion on eligible project types later in the presentation. This program is funded at $2 million annually in the TIP, with the first round of projects selected last year and the second round, or rather 2 years ago now that we're in the new fiscal year, and the second round of funding allocated in the most recent TIP cycle that just completed. Eligible applicants for the Community Connections program include municipalities and regional transit authorities. Nonprofits and transportation management associations are also welcome to apply for funding through the program, as long as they do so in partnership with a municipality or RTA. So with that background on the program, I want to dive now into some of the challenges that have arisen with the Community Connections program through the first 2 funding rounds. And these first two funding rounds have really functioned as sort of an extended pilot as the program has been rolled out. And again, this is a refresher on some of the content that we covered back in early September, but it will help set the stage for today's discussion a little bit later on. So current challenges for the program fall into 2 main categories: general administrative hurdles and the demands that transit operating projects place on the program specifically. Beginning with administrative hurdles, the way the program is set up now is that each project proposal is treated as a unique project, meaning that each project receives its own administration contract. This places a heavy administrative burden on staff to manage the contracting paperwork directly with project proponents for each of the 14 projects that are currently funded through the program. Right now, this burden falls most directly on staff in MassDOT's Office of Transportation Planning. We've explored shifting some of this contracting work to MPO staff, but across both agencies, there's limited bandwidth for staff to take on what we anticipate to be several hundred hours of new obligations in contract administration each year. Transit operating projects also have their own administrative challenges over and above those of capital projects, as these operating projects require more month-to-month engagement with project proponents. These projects also require additional year-end analysis to determine whether or not they've achieved a net greenhouse gas reduction before they're eligible for their second and third years of funding. Additionally, funding operating projects across multiple years can limit the amount of funding remaining within the program for smaller capital projects going forward. This reduces the program's ability to function as a flexible near-term funding source for small projects across the region. So aside from these 2 main challenges, there are also some improvements that can be made to the application process for the program. The application is currently fairly rigorous, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it can make applying to the program a greater challenge for proponents. And so staff are working to simplify the application, which would help lower the barriers to entry into the program, and that would bring the application process more in line with the goal of the program to function as a relatively nimble funding source when compared with other, or sort of the larger TIP process. And so how do we address some of these challenges? Our recommended program improvements generally fall into 2 categories. First, we're proposing some strategies to simplify the administration of capital projects funded through the Community Connections program. And then second, also discuss some possible paths forward for considering transit operating projects through the program. On the coming slides, I'll walk through each of these individually. But before I do that, I do want to emphasize that these recommendations have really been the result of extensive consultation between MPO staff, MAPC staff, and staff in MassDOT's Office of Transportation Planning. So all 3 parties have really discussed the existing program at length, and what follows in these recommendations are some mutually agreed upon strategies for making the Community Connections Program successful and sustainable in the long run. Beginning with our first recommendation, which is to simplify project administration for capital projects funded through the Community Connections Program. Again, right now, each project is treated as its own unique entity with its own contracting and procurement process. This adjustment would move the program to a collective purchasing model where MAPC would conduct a joint procurement for all capital items approved through the program each year. This procurement would take place through MAPC vendor contracts that have already been pre-approved as meeting the requirements for federal funding. And because these procurements would already be established, or rather are already established, that would allow the program to better define the materials that are eligible for purchase. This helps to simplify the application process, as this essentially allows proponents to tell us what they would like to purchase and how they would like to use those items, with MPO staff scoring projects based on those details. For example, a municipality could say that they want to install X type of pre-approved bike racks at these locations, and another might want to install Y type of pre-approved transit signals at these intersections. And then from there, a joint procurement could be done for bike racks and transit signals once the projects are selected for funding by the board. This change would greatly reduce the administrative burden of the program on all parties and would more or less eliminate questions about project eligibility for federal funding, which is always something that we have to keep in mind. Over the last several weeks, MPO staff have worked with MAPC to identify a list of federally compliant procurements that are in place to be used to fund projects during this coming TIP cycle. Options identified include many of the project types that have historically been funded through the Community Connections Program, including bicycle racks and parking, blue bike stocks and bicycles, bus and bicycle lane paint, and transit signal priority systems. In addition to these project types, MPO staff are working with MAPC and the MBTA to identify paths forward for other capital items in future funding rounds. These include parking management systems, bus shelters, and other street furniture. Our second recommendation is to consider adjusting how the Community Connections Program funds transit operating projects. So when we talked about this back in September, we outlined two basic options here. The first is to require that shuttle and microtransit projects be administered directly by regional transit authorities. In this situation, the RTA would be the project proponent, which could be done in partnership with a municipality or other organizations. This means that the federal highway CMAQ funds that are used to support these projects would be flexed to the Federal Transit Administration, with FTA working directly with the proponent RTA on project oversight. This option greatly reduces the administrative burden for transit operating projects on MassDOT and MPO staff, as project administration would be shifted into a workflow that's already happening between FTA and the RTAs. The second option that we discussed at our last meeting is to remove transit operating projects from the list of eligible projects funded through the Community Connections Program. This would clearly reduce the administrative burden of those projects for all parties and would also allow the program to retain greater financial flexibility year to year, as there would be few, if any, multi-year projects funded. So these were sort of the two options that were put on the table at the last meeting. And in response to these recommendations, when we first proposed them back in September, this board asked the MPO staff to more deeply engage the region's RTAs to better understand how this proposal would work for them. And this is specifically around the proposal that RTAs become the lead project administrator for any operating projects. Excuse me. So over the last several weeks, MPO staff have met with 6 of the region's RTAs that have some level of overlap between their current service areas and the MPO's 97 cities and towns. During these conversations, MPO staff outlined the basics of the Community Connections Program and the proposed changes to it, with a focus on understanding how well the proposed approach to transit operating projects would work for each RTA. In general, the RTAs were supportive of the requirement that they directly administer and have oversight over shuttle and microtransit projects. The transit agencies we spoke with outlined several benefits of this proposed approach to project administration. We heard that they have a strong understanding of baseline of regional and sub-regional mobility needs. Taking a more active role in the application and administration process would put them in a place to identify the project proposals that have the greatest chances of long-term success as operating projects. The RTAs also stated that the proposed approach would help to ensure greater coordination between them and the municipalities in their service areas. This would reduce the likelihood that we see project proposals that duplicate or otherwise negatively impact existing RTA service in the region. And finally, we heard that the proposed approach centers the focus of the program on helping RTAs address gaps that they've already identified through prior service planning efforts. Piloting expanded evening and weekend RTA service was a recurring theme across several conversations. Overall, the RTAs said that this proposal makes sense because it allows the Community Connections program to utilize the existing workflow for grant administration between the RTAs and the Federal Transit Administration. Aligning this funding source with this existing process cuts down on the overall administrative burden for this program for all parties and promotes a more sustainable program in the long run. Recognizing that there are significant differences between the operations of the MBTA and the other 5 RTAs that we spoke with, I want to spend a little bit of time highlighting how the feedback we received differed across stakeholders. The benefits outlined on the previous slide still very much apply to the MBTA, as we discussed the importance of promoting enhanced coordination between all stakeholders on any projects that impact operations. The MBTA noted, however, that taking on new operating projects through the Community Connections program may not be a good fit for the agency at this time. This is the case for 2 key reasons. First, the MBTA is in the midst of a multi-year service planning effort through the ongoing bus network redesign project. This introduces significant uncertainty into what future service patterns will look like within the T's service area, making this an inopportune time to try to add new service through a Community Connections grant. The T also discussed that current staffing constraints limit the agency's ability to fully coordinate discrete project proposals with municipalities in the region, and then to administer those projects going forward should they be awarded an operating grant. So from all of this feedback flow the following recommendations. First, that we go ahead with implementing the requirement that transit operating projects like shuttles and microtransit services be administered directly by RTAs. This ensures a viable path forward for administering these projects and immediately opens a funding opportunity for transit service projects in more than 3 dozen communities in the region that are served by the region's RTAs. The second part of the recommendation is to institute a 1-year pause on the funding of new transit operating projects in the parts of the region with service that are solely provided by the MBTA. This allows the bus network redesign effort to advance, which will help to identify gaps in service that could be filled by future Community Connections grants, and also provides additional time to identify the necessary staffing capacity at the T to administer these grants going forward. So as we head into the discussion, I want to refocus on the decisions that we are asking you to consider today. First, does this board support the adoption of a collective purchasing model for capital projects funded through the Community Connections program, including for things such as bicycle racks, bike share stations, bus lane paint, and transit signal priority systems? And second, does this board want to adopt an RTA-centered approach to the administration of transit operating projects, including phasing in eligibility for these funding opportunities over time across the region? Before we get to those questions, I want to briefly highlight where we're heading in the coming months with the Community Connections program. So we are already 3 weeks into the start of federal fiscal year 2022, believe it or not, which means we are on a relatively short timeline to launch the application for new Community Connections projects this year. That makes the decisions made today especially important, as we would like to release this year's application in the next couple of weeks. Those applications will be due around December 10th, giving project proponents roughly 6 weeks to submit. MPO staff will begin the project scoring process from there. And then project selection conversations will continue with this board throughout the early part of 2022, with a draft slate of projects likely chosen by late March or early April. And so with that, I'll turn it back over to the chair to open things up for discussion, and I can go ahead and bring up those questions again so you have them on the screen for reference.
Thank you, Matt. Discussion by the members? Daniel Amstutz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Matt, for going over all of that again, even over some of the stuff we've discussed previously, and also to the MPO staff for reaching out to the RTAs and getting that feedback. I think that's extremely, is extremely important in talking about this and getting at these decision points. I think I have a couple of questions. I think I generally support like the first point about the collective purchasing model. I think that, it's a sort of existing model that MAPC uses, so I think it's familiar to most people. My question about that first is, would people have to go through the collective purchasing, or could they go through some other way of acquiring the materials? And then secondly, before you answer that, I think it's great that the RTAs are on board with the administration of the operating projects. My question is about, are there some, you mentioned like 36 communities that are served by the RTAs. Are there some locations or some communities that are served by both the MBTA and the RTA? If there's some overlapping areas? And then secondly, was there also meant to be a question, or was there a question about whether, I just forget if we decided on whether or not the any of these projects, RTA or transit projects, would get multiple years like we haven't, like some projects that have been approved. So those are my questions. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for all those. So on your first question about the collective procurement, so our intention is that any projects would basically use the collective procurement list as sort of a menu of options to select from, and then it would be up to the proponent to say, we want these sorts of bike racks that are on the procurement list in these locations, and then staff would sort of work with that information to score the project. And so the intention is definitely to move all of those smaller capital projects to this collective purchasing model, just to really streamline the overall process. And as I mentioned, we are starting with a focus list of things that are already eligible for federally compliant procurements, but we'll continue to work with MAPC and others to expand that list going forward. And then let's see. Second question was on overlap. So there are municipalities that do have overlap. Our thinking and sort of proposal here is that any community that is already served directly by an RTA would be eligible for funding through that RTA. And so even in cases where there's overlap, if they're served by a non-MBTA RTA, then that community would be eligible for funding through whatever that RTA is. And then, sorry, I'm trying to, your third question.
It was about funding over multiple years for the transit operating.
Yeah, so that decision is ultimately up to this board, for any given project. For the two operating projects that we've already funded, those are the shuttle projects in both Newton and Canton. This board sort of decided to go ahead and tentatively allocate all 3 years of funding, with the caveat that projects could only receive their second year and then third year funding if they show a net greenhouse gas benefit, in that prior operating year. And so, so right now we have all 3 years of funding allocated to both of those projects, but they would only actually receive that funding if they show a net greenhouse gas benefit from their early years of operations.
Okay,
so
thanks.
Yeah, so the intention would probably be to continue that going forward, but ultimately, that decision is up to the board with any given project.
I got it. Thank you very much.
David Kozis.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. So in terms of the recommendation that, that RTAs must administer any transit operating project, my question is, projects that are similar to the one you just mentioned, the Numo expansion project in Newton, which is like a first mile, last mile transit shuttle, which was funded in the last cycle. And, I'm not involved in Numo, but I do know that it's not being administered by an RTA, it's being managed by a contractor, by VIA. So, and I'm not sure, what difficulties that causes, but I guess my question is, if this change is approved, then would projects, similar to the Numo project no longer be eligible in the same way? Would we, would a project like that just need to be managed by the T instead of by VIA or some other kind of contractor? Is that what this means?
Yeah, so right now the contract administration, the sort of burden for that falls on MassDOT's Office of Transportation Planning. And so sort of from the, from the funding side of things, that's where a lot of the work is, specifically for the Numo project. And so, the reason that this conversation sort of began around how to handle these operating projects is largely flowing from, the experience thus far with OTP managing those projects, just because, staff have, a lot of responsibilities already on their plates, and, taking on sort of additional administration responsibilities, which include sort of month-to-month reporting for operating projects, was sort of looking like it would become unsustainable. And I certainly welcome, further input on this from OTP specifically, but so the intention would be to move away from that model, just because we didn't feel like it was a sustainable model for the long run functioning of the program as a whole. And we didn't want to get ourselves into a position where we were awarding grants to projects that there wasn't really staff capacity to then administer. And so, so the short answer is that, the proposal is to shift away towards the RTA centered model, which would say that if a municipality wanted to pursue a project like the Numo shuttle, that they would need to work with their RTA to advance that project.
Right. So in this case, it would be working with the MBTA. I'm not sure if that would mean that we would end up with the same sort of opportunities and the same services and the same costs, or if it just sort of kills the project at the beginning.
Yeah, so the proposal on the table for today would be to sort of continue to explore what that looks like in the MBTA only service region for future years, acknowledging again the sort of ongoing work around the bus network redesign and sort of service planning efforts that are happening through that. And so so the proposal would be, to basically like hold off on committing funding to those projects without sort of a guaranteed path forward for them this year, and then continue to explore that going forward.
All right, and we're being asked at this meeting right now to be voting one way or another on this recommendation?
That's correct.
Okay, I'm not sure that I'm prepared to vote, but let's see what other people say.
On to other people, Jim Fitzgerald.
Sorry, fumbling with the unmute. So David's kind of getting at some of the questions I have, especially with as it relates to MBTA. In this instance, would the MBTA even be allowed to contract with a private operator? Because my understanding is that they typically can't do that. And would it need to be MBTA operators and MBTA vehicles that would need to that would have to operate any of these services?
I might.
Maybe you don't know that answer, but that was my understanding.
Yeah, I see Jillian's raised her hand, so I might defer to her if she has an answer to that before I jump in.
Yeah, I don't know that I'll be a ton of help. So I think the proposal right now is that for at least this upcoming round of Community Connections grants for federal fiscal year 23, that we would not accept applications for operating projects within the MBTA service area for a large reason, which you're indicating, which is we still don't really fully understand what that would look like. So if the funds get transferred to the MBTA, they then become FTA funds. And right now we've only administered these funds as FHWA funds. So there's still a lot of questions surrounding how we would do that. And we don't currently at this moment have capacity to take that on. We also are dealing with the larger picture, which is that we have this bus network redesign effort going on. And at this time, we don't think that we really want to get ahead of the outcomes of that planning exercise and commit to some microtransit in the region, not knowing what the larger picture is going to look like. So essentially our recommendation was just for this round to put a pause on the operating projects within that service area, come back next year and see how the situation has changed, but the MBTA would still be supportive on the capital side of the community connections program.
Right, so even after the 1 year pause, I guess then I just have a more direct question of, would a future year project be allowed to be, for example, a service operated by a TMA that uses a private operator? And is that even possible within the MBTA's operating structure? Because I thought it wasn't, due to union issues and things like that. And maybe you don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, I'm looking at this solely as like the eligibility of the funding type, not necessarily the mechanism within the MBTA. I agree, there are a whole bunch of other issues about whether or not it becomes a subrecipient agreement and we enter into that with an entity to provide microtransit, or if, there are a lot of different options, and that's why this gets very complicated and is hard to kind of answer collectively without more details at this time.
Right, and I fully support the bus network redesign. I have, over the years, and we're well engaged with you guys, which is fantastic. So we're working very well on that, and I understand, but that still is obviously taking some time to sort out and make decisions. There's an example of a project that we supported through the Seaport TMA that was trying to do a circulator service that, again, micro type transit, kind of not the type of thing that, frankly, I think the MBTA, would have had as a priority or something they would even be interested in operating as a route, which makes total sense, much more micro in every sense of the word, but was also what we thought was a much needed project. So it just seems like that type of project, as an example, maybe wouldn't even be an option if the MBTA was administering the program, and that's my concern. I guess like David, I can't really at this time, without more information, support that. On the other question, I think MEPC did a fantastic job of kind of pooled purchasing of capital equipment, so I completely support that. But I just wanted to confirm that if, for example, a city was submitting for a transit signal project at an intersection, are they required to go through that? Or if they had another option or vendor or source for acquiring that, they could still go their own, basically, right? Or would they have to go through the collective purchasing with MAPC?
So in the case of transit signal priority, those projects would also need to be coordinated in partnership with the MBTA. And so, using the existing procurements around that ensures that the equipment is compatible with, the MBTA's needs for transit signals. And so, I think we are sort of steering the project applications in that direction to ensure that we don't end up with, different sorts of equipment being pursued that may or may not be in line with needs. And so I think that
would they be required to, is my question. And then my other question is it limit all capital projects to these types of elements, or could a municipality bring forward like a trail extension project that we would hire our own capital or own resources to implement? So the first question is, do you have to go through the joint purchasing if you want to purchase capital materials? And number two, does it limit it to just that type of application, or could you also pursue other capital projects?
So I mean, essentially the joint procurement list would become sort of a menu of options, and then we would require that applications are selecting from that menu for the grants. And so, the goal here again is really to simplify the overall process that's associated with this program, so that it becomes a sustainable funding source for these sorts of projects going forward. And so really we're just trying to leverage existing procurements that already exist, so as not to sort of recreate the wheel on other sorts of similar type of projects. And then of course other capital project requests broadly are certainly welcome through any other sort of bucket of funding within the TIP. And so that includes sort of a whole range of other things, though those projects tend to be larger. And so right now with these smaller projects, just recognizing that the timeline for implementation is short, it's typically 1 year. And so we're really trying to streamline that process so we don't end up in a position where we're scrambling to try to figure out a federally compliant project on a 1-year timeline and get those funds obligated. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I just don't know if that answered my question. Are all capital projects limited to this kind of menu of joint purchasing elements?
You want me to try? Matt, let me try to answer.
Okay.
So if you have a project that is part of what would be the MAPC joint purchasing, right? You want to do bus shelters or you want to do whatever. Yes, our proposal is you would have to go through that process. If you want to do something outside of that process, I guess we would have to figure out whether it's implementable and how easily it is implementable under this process. For example, TSP, I believe that the T has agreed to administer some of the TSP projects because they're capital projects and they're easy to do, right? So there are, some of this is it will develop over time, but yeah, if you want to do something that is easily included or appropriately included within MAPC's joint purchasing arrangements, our expectation is you would go through that process in order to get a community connections grant. Is that right, Matt?
That's correct. Thank you.
Okay. Lynn Diggins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question involves the air quality assessment. So you said that that's going to be up to the board to make decisions about how that's assessed. I kind of lost it there because, and the reason I'm asking that is that it factors into the RTA operating center approach on operating projects.
Yeah, so sorry, I can clarify that. So, my point there was that assigning any year of funding to any project is always at the board's discretion. And so the board is not required to obligate 3 years of funds to any given operating project. The board could say, we want to fund 1 year, we want to fund 2 years. It's not a requirement that it's necessarily all or nothing, though obviously proponents are typically applying for the, allowed up to 3 years of funding. And then the sort of caveat, the thing that has to be confirmed before a project could actually receive its second or third year of funding is that it would have to show an air quality benefit. And that's a requirement of using the congestion mitigation and air quality funds through the federal government.
Right. And so what I want to make sure now is can we do that assessments? Because if we can't, then we're effectively just giving them 1 year, right? Because then we'll say, well, we can't make the assessment. So I'm just trying to understand, can we do that assessment? Are we confident we can do that?
Yeah, so we have the sort of existing, formula for doing that work. And then we just work with the project proponent to understand how their project has performed in that prior year with, ridership numbers and the like. And so we do have, the capacity to do that analysis.
Okay, that's great. And just one more follow-up question. Do you think it's likely that they will show that they're having a positive effect so that they can get the additional funding?
So he can't answer that. It depends on whether they get the ridership they projected. So
okay,
it is a sort of a spreadsheet model.
Right.
X amount of ridership, therefore you can make some assumption about how much carbon you're saving by those people not taking a car.
Right.
But the vehicle itself is producing carbon, and so it all basically hinges on, did you get the ridership you said you'd get? And if not, did you get enough that it's still air quality positive?
Right. And so in approving the project, we will know that based on a projection of ridership, that they would have the potential of meeting the requirements to get the second year funding, is what I'm hearing you saying.
Yes.
Great. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yep. Jen Constable.
Thank you. And this question may have been asked in some form already, but my question is specifically around supporting the RTA-centered approach for the administration of operating projects and how that might impact those communities not serviced by an RTA.
Yeah, so for those communities that are outside of a non-MBTA RTA region, right now, those communities will be subject to sort of a one-year pause on funding, new shuttle operations until we sort of continue the process around the bus network redesign and working with the T to identify a pipeline for these projects going forward. That being said, this sort of bucket of projects around, transit operating projects funded through community connections is really just sort of one small component of the overall community connections and the overall TIP picture. And so obviously, all communities in the region are still eligible for funding small dollar capital items like bike racks, et cetera, through the community connections program, as they are eligible for all other TIP funds. And so, and so even though there's sort of a pause on this one component, there are still sort of all of these other opportunities where communities can propose ways for us to help them meet their needs.
Okay, thank you. I think if we're talking about the bus network redesign, as we understand right now, some of the new proposed routes, I think that there's some significant concerns on the South Shore, particularly as it relates to some of those smaller routes or subsidized routes. So I think, just for the record, I am, for those reasons, not ready to support this yet today. But thank you.
Thank you. David Kozis.
Thank you. So I think I'm feeling right now not inclined to vote for the proposed RTA centered approach. It feels too blunt to me. It just seems that the impact on some, and it's not a NUMO project because that's already funded, but some other good projects that might want to come forward, it just feels like it is, it's just going to automatically take them off the table. They won't be able to be considered. And keep in mind that the MPO, we have the ability to vote to fund or choose not to fund these types of operating projects anyway. I think that I prefer that we just come up with a different way to address the staffing concerns, and not move forward with this particular recommendation. Thank you.
Yep. Kim Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just maybe another thought about the air quality. I should point out, Matt is absolutely right that you have to show a clear air quality, net positive air quality benefit to qualify for CMAQ funding. But that net quality air benefit can be, there is no threshold. It can be 0.1 kilograms per year. It could be tiny. It just has to be a net positive. So the MPO could decide that even if a project shows an air quality benefit in the first year, it may not have gotten the ridership that it had estimated to get, but it's still showing a benefit. It could still decide that it's not worth it to spend $100,000 or $200,000, whatever it would be, to get that infinitesimal air quality benefit. So I would also suggest that having an air quality benefit not be the sole criterion that is used to determine whether the second or third year funding for any service is warranted, that there actually be some more expansive criteria used to figure out whether it's worth it to keep running a service. Thank you.
Yep. Any other MPO members before I open it up to non-MPO members? Seeing none. Derek Cravat.
Thank you. So on this question of the RTA-centered approach, as the sort of one managing the contracts for the current capital, both capital projects and the operating projects.
I need somebody to mute who's having a side conversation if we can hear you.
We do have that.
Okay.
Operational table.
It might be background noise within our office.
Yeah, I believe that's the case.
Okay, Derek, go ahead.
Okay. Okay. Apologies. I'll try to get closer to the microphone. But on this question of the RTA-centered approach, I just wanted to say that I think there's potential for a middle ground with regard to sort of transferring the funds to FTA for the projects within RTA service areas, and then potentially keeping the funding with FHWA for the projects within the MBTA service area, if the case can be made that the projects are generally supported by the MBTA and are aligned with the ongoing bus network redesign. I think we have to do some huddling, Matt and the team, just to figure out how we might want to frame that within the guidance and coordinate with the MBTA on that as well. But I just wanted to throw in that I think there may be a potential for some kind of middle ground there where we can support the RTA-centered approach while not just making any project within the MBTA service area ineligible. So I think we should have some further discussion on that as you develop the guidance.
David Kucharski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dave Kucharski, City of Salem. Just wanted to clarify something. I heard the word pause used a couple times. Does that mean that the program for municipalities within the MBTA service area is in fact paused for this coming year? If we were seeking funding for microtransit operations, or that has yet to be determined based on the MPO vote?
Well, so two things. First, it's not just a function of the MPO vote, okay? The MPO vote could be not to do the RTA-centered project approach, and we, as the implementing agency, may still make a decision that we don't have the bandwidth to do this, and you can fund these projects if you want, but they will not be implemented, okay? Derek, from my staff, has just said on a case-by-case basis, we will try to work with people to see if we can accommodate these projects within our bandwidth. But if we can't, it does no good for the MPO to fund a project that no one will implement, okay? So this was part of staff's chance to try to get the MPO to say, okay, for those RTAs, the 36 or 32 communities, we should have an RTA-centered approach because we all agree we can flex the money to FTA, they can administer, the RTAs will administer it, and no administrative burden on all of us. For the MBTA, has clearly said for this year at least, they do not have the bandwidth or the inclination to take on this work. OTP does not necessarily have the bandwidth, okay? So we're not saying, I guess we're not saying, we could say one of two things. We could say, yes, it's paused for this year. We are not soliciting operating projects within the MBTA service area unless the community is also served by an RTA, or we could say we'll solicit them, but none of them get awarded without OTP saying we'll implement them because there's no point, right? I don't want to be in a position where the MPO is tied up money and OTP says we don't have the bandwidth. I should also note that Federal Highway also has limited bandwidth, right? Part of this is this is a transit operating program. Federal Highway has a limited staff who would have to administer all of these contracts along with us. They have a certain expertise, which is not transit operating. This was all an attempt to try to move this program to somewhere, my staff is the planning staff. We are not really supposed to be managing implementation projects. We have, because these are orphan projects. There's no place to put them in MassDOT. So I guess what we're saying is there a pause? If the MPO doesn't, to David's point, the MPO doesn't want to pause. The MPO can approve funding and solicit projects. But when the time comes to vote, we'll have to look at it and tell you whether it makes sense for you to vote yes, because we may not be able to implement them. Others? Jillian.
I may as well also clarify that, I mean, the staff constraints that OTP has experienced, while it's been through the administration of these funds as FHWA funds, it is a concern that the MBTA has looking at this potential, because it's not something we currently do. We would have to navigate a lot of the similar challenges that are being faced by our partners at MassDOT, which is what informed our recommendation, at least for the near term, to at least be upfront with everyone that we don't think we have the capacity to do this in the near term, especially given where our planning process is. That being said, what we had said was that we could consider these on a case-by-case basis. However, I did want to be fair with all of our municipal partners that I don't think it doesn't look like it would be a great time, but we did offer that we could consider them on a case-by-case basis. However, I will just say that the administration of even these capital projects has exceeded what we expected. We are learning a lot as we are going through the process, as 2 rounds of those are now being administered. So I think given our limited capacity, we wanted to focus it on those projects, which there have been some successful implementations of. And I do want to just be clear with everyone that we're not trying to do this to limit opportunities for municipalities. We're just trying to set projects up for success. If we take these on and we don't have the capacity to do that, they're not going to be successful. And we really want to try and make sure that what we are committing to, we can actually execute on the capital side and the operating side. So I don't want it to seem like we aren't open to having a lot of these conversations. As you guys know, through the bus network redesign, the MBTA is very open to having all of these conversations, and we want to know where there's interest and need. We just don't want to overcommit and then have unfortunate results as of that. So we were just trying to manage expectations in regards to these projects because they have exceeded our expectations in terms of the amount of time we have to dedicate to them. So thank you.
Keep old enough.
So my original question was, you're saying you don't have the bandwidth, and so you're going to give it to the T to do, and do they have the bandwidth? And we just heard from an MBTA official that it doesn't sound like they have the bandwidth either. And I would have been skeptical that they would, there are people out there, and I want to stress I'm not one of them. And I want to stress that strongly, but there are people out there who think the MBTA can't do what it's supposed to be doing now. And now you're giving them an additional burden. So I think my question's been answered. And, I would say, and I was going to say that I want to hear from an MBTA official that, yes, they're going to do this. They have the bandwidth to do this, and they're enthusiastic about doing it. And I just think I just heard just the opposite. So if I'm in a town and my town wants to do a shuttle bus service, and we want to get some money from it through this program, you're telling the town, sure, but you have to work with the T and have them administrate it in order to do this. And I think that kills it right there. Is the town going to be willing to do that? Those are my questions.
Well, I don't think it was really a question, it was a statement, but thank you. Eric?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So maybe a path forward for today is, as Derek Cravath had said, maybe take back the proposal here on the transit pilot projects, and maybe the team can kind of huddle on that one, and then maybe see if folks want to make a decision on the capital projects.
Others? So does anybody object to the capital proposal? I see nobody raising their hand to object. So I think we're fairly confident that staff can adopt this as part of the proposal for the community connections for this coming year, right? Okay. So The next item. Do people object to the RTAs administering the projects where the RTAs have agreed that they would? Or do people just want to not do any of this and we'll just have our same proposals and, you know, we'll just figure it out as we go? Lynn?
I don't have an objection. I mean, I'm just hanging back because some of my colleagues do, and I kind of want to respect that. But I guess part of me is like, well, what is going to be the practical effect of doing it? Because I was going to ask, like, how many projects did we have in the universe last cycle, and what was their cost? Because my inclination is to think that we're going to go for more of the smaller projects, and I can envision us encouraging people to do more things like bike racks and whatnot. As long as we have the bandwidth to support those, we could spend most of the monies that we have allotted, because it's not a whole lot to that. And so the second one would effectively become moot. But I don't want to say that as a way of belittling my colleagues' concerns. So out of respect for them, I would hang back. But personally, I'm fine with going forward with it.
Okay. Others? Daniel Hemsteds.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I think from my point of view, I personally don't see any issue with the first one about capital projects. Then the operating, it seems like it makes sense for at least those communities that are served mainly by an RTA or overlapping with the MBTA, that it would be good for them, maybe give them an opportunity to propose some things that they might be thinking about, but they don't know if they have the capacity for. And I fully respect OTP and the MBTA with regards to the lack of staff capacity coming from, we have a few people, we're short-staffed in our own department over here, so I fully understand that, and I think understand what the impression, that we don't want to allocate money to projects that simply can't get implemented because there's not enough time in the day for anyone to be able to oversee that. So, but I understand what my other colleagues are saying about the concerns of perhaps being unable to move forward on certain projects. But again, it's if they can't get implemented, it's sort of throwing money into nowhere. So I don't know. That's my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Jim Fitzgerald.
Is there any way for the administrative burden on MassDOT planning, for example, for a shuttle to be lessened? Or are these just the rules of how the funding needs to get administered? I mean, if an applicant could prove that they, take on the administrative aspects of the contract, or is that just not an option here? I guess is my question.
Right, so here's where we are. Federal Highway has one cognizant agency for all federal highway funds within Massachusetts, and that's the MassDOT, right? They don't make, with the exception of where Congress mandates it, they don't make any individual grants to cities and towns, okay? So all federal funds have to flow through MassDOT. So each of these individual contracts requires a contract between MassDOT and the city, and invoices have to be submitted on a monthly basis from the city to MassDOT, and then they have to be, Federal Highway oversees the contract on their end. So, I would love it if there was some other way, because again, my staff does a lot of work on stuff that is clearly not planning, right? But it takes up time and it takes up bandwidth and takes them away from their other responsibilities. But right now, there is no way to do something that does not involve a contract for each individual project between MassDOT and the implementing city or town. And it comes with all the federal requirements of when you're implementing. You guys have to make sure, cities and towns have to make sure they're implementing consistent with federal procurement requirements, all federal oversight requirements. So yeah, it's why we're stuck where we are.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. So the answer is really no, not really.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Jillian?
Yeah, I would just like to offer, as I realize this is a conversation that's going to have longer implications, is that one of the reasons why I think the RTA-centered approach is actually appealing for a near term is because it gives us an opportunity to kind of pilot what those relationships and what that mechanism would actually look like, and to probably learn some lessons from our colleagues at the RTAs regarding how exactly we can make sure these projects are successful, so that if we are able, once bus network redesign and once we're out of a horrible job market, once the situation changes, we may be in a much better position to then make this more broadly available across the region. So I do think it does offer a little bit of an opportunity if we at least look at it as a pilot that we can all learn from, especially us, their colleagues at the MBTA, who would probably benefit a lot from seeing how these projects can be executed using FTA funds. So I do just want to offer that for consideration.
Thank you. So do people have a sense that staff needs to know as they're getting ready to do their solicitation for the community connections program? I think from what I'm hearing is we're not taking a pause. We're going to take applications and we're going to consider them, and at some point somebody will say yes or no, and do we have the bandwidth to implement them? The question is, for those that are located within those 32 or 36 communities, do we either want to require RTA involvement or somehow give a heads up that RTA involvement will be a plus when we consider your project, or do we just want to keep soliciting projects like we do today? Staff just needs to know. Lynn?
So, sorry about the delay there. I mean, maybe I'm going to contradict what I said, but I would not want to go through the process of submitting a project that is not going to be approved or could not be implemented if the persons on the other side knew that in advance. So at the very least, we need to tell them that the probabilities are low, both with respect to it getting approved or it getting implemented. And so with that, my inclination is to go ahead and make a motion to support both of these decision points, do it individually, take the vote, see where the votes fall out, and then go from there.
All right. Eric, you got something you want to say before we take motions?
Well, it's interesting. I didn't think Len was going to go in that direction because I was getting a sense from the members that there was not support actually to do what staff has proposed. And I was actually responding to what you said, David, which is if folks would rather continue to solicit kind of broad, transit pilot projects from across the region, I would emphasize that partnering with an RTA would give you extra points or that there would be, whatever we want to say, extra points, I guess, for consideration because of the expertise of the RTAs, as well as the ability to facilitate the program smoother. If folks do want to continue to solicit, I mean, that is an avenue we can go down. And like David said, we can just kind of cross that bridge about what, evaluating the projects both on their merits about what do we think the impacts will be, what do we think the air quality impacts will be, as well as what's the capacity to administer, those contracts with MassDOT and other, potential other parties as well. So those are the comments I was going to make.
All right. So Lynn, do you want to make a motion on one or both of these individually?
Yes. Yes, so I think it's better to take them separately, and I'll just be a cleaner, a longer vote, but it'll be cleaner. And so I will make the motion to support the first point.
Thank you. Is there a second? Eric Barassa.
Yeah, I'll second the motion to support the proposed collective purchasing model that was presented today.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions on this before we vote? Seeing none, John, then call the roll.
David Moeller,
Yes.
John Bouchard,
John Bouchard is no longer at the meeting.
John Romano,
John Romano, yes.
Jillian Linnell,
Jillian Linnell, yes.
Sarah Lee,
Sarah Lee, yes.
Eric Barassa,
Eric Barassa, yes.
Amira Patterson,
Amira Patterson, yes.
Leonard Diggins,
Leonard Diggins, yes.
Bill Conroy,
Bill Conroy, yes.
Jim Fitzgerald,
Jim Fitzgerald, yes.
Jay Monty,
Jay Monty, yes.
David Kozis,
David Kozis, yes.
Daniel Amstutz,
Daniel Amstutz, yes.
Todd Corain,
Todd Corain, yes.
Brad Rawson,
Brad Rawson, yes.
Austin Saganowitz,
Austin Saganowitz, yes.
Erica Jerem,
Erica Jerem, yes.
Darlene Nguyen,
Darlene Wynn, yes.
Tina Cassidy, Jennifer Constable,
Jennifer Constable, yes.
and Steve Olenoff.
Is Tom not here?
Tom told me he had to leave at 11:30.
Okay.
And
I'll vote yes.
motion carries, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Lynn, you want to make a motion on the second bullet?
Yes, sir. So I'll make a motion to support the RTA centered approach to the administration of operating projects.
Thank you. Is there a second? Seeing none, motion fails of a lack of a second. So thanks, Matt. So on the capital side, solicit for a collective purchasing model. On the other side, solicit just projects like we always do, and we will see what we can accommodate, if any.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yep. Steve Olin, if you have your hand up.
Yeah, so I like what you said before, David. It seemed to be a good compromise. That, so I'd like to make a motion to do it the way you suggested. You can just repeat what you said.
Okay, I think Steve is making a motion that for the 32 communities, or 36, whatever the number is, Matt, within where RTAs operate service, we would strongly encourage that the RTAs be co-applicants on the projects and actually take on the administrative burden, and that would get you a benefit in consideration, but that we wouldn't require it, and we'll take applications from anybody for anything with the assumption of there is a limit of what we could do, if any. Is that okay, Steve?
Yes, I'll make that motion.
All right, is there a second on that? Eric Barassa.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Any questions, comments before we take our vote? Matt, you understand what the vote is, right? Since you'll have to implement.
I do, yes. Just to clarify, so it wouldn't be a requirement that RTAs administer in those 38 communities, but just a strong encouragement. Is that accurate?
I think so, because I just can't see the MPO saying to the 36 or 38, whatever it is, that somehow they don't have the wherewithal to apply, but the other, whatever the number is, 70, 68 would. So yeah, I think well, certainly that's the motion. I think that's why.
Okay, that makes sense to me. Thank you.
All right, so Jonathan, please call the roll.
David Moeller,
Yes.
John Romano,
Yes.
Jillian Linnell,
Yes.
Sarah Lee,
Yes.
Eric Barassa,
Eric Barassa, yes.
Amira Patterson,
Mayor Patterson, yes.
Leonard Diggins,
Leonard Diggins, yes.
Bill Conroy,
Bill Conroy, yes.
Jim Fitzgerald,
Can I abstain or is that not an option?
Yeah, you can abstain.
can abstain.
All right, I'll do that.
Jay Monty,
Hey, Monty, yes.
David Kozis,
David Kozis, yes.
Daniel Amstutz,
Daniel Amstutz, yes.
Todd Corain,
Todd Green, yes.
Brad Rawson,
Brad Rawson, yes.
Austin Saganowitz,
Austin Sinano, yes.
Erica Jerem,
I think this is a great compromise. I vote yes. Erica Jerem votes yes.
Darlene Wynn,
Darlene Nguyen votes yes as well.
Tina Cassidy.
Tina Cassidy is no longer at the meeting.
Okay. Jennifer Constable,
Jennifer Constable, yes.
and Steve Olenoff.
Steve Olenoff, yes.
Motion
Thank you
carries.
very much.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jonathan. Next item on the agenda is the Long Range Transportation Plan Kickoff. And it's Ann McGann and Michelle Scott, and I'll let you guys figure out who's going first.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm here to kick off the development of the next Long Range Transportation Plan, or the LRTP. And both Michelle Scott and I are co-managing the LRTP, and she is also here to help answer any questions. So today I'm going to give a quick overview of the LRTP, schedule for the adoption of the new LRTP, Destination 2050. I'll go through the tasks included in the schedule, starting with the implementation of the current LRTP, Destination 2040, followed by the task to complete the new plan, Destination 2050, and then I'll finish up with next steps in the LRTP process. Oh, I don't know why this is doing this. Sorry. So the LRTP is one of the 3 certification documents that the MPO is federally required to develop along with the TIP and the UPWP. The LRTP sets the framework for much of the work done by the MPO. It establishes the vision and goals of the MPO, which guide decisions about investments in the region's transportation system to bring the system from its current state towards the MPO's vision for the future. The vision and goals are the basis for the criteria used to select transportation projects in the TIP and LRTP and studies in the UPWP. The LRTP also establishes the transportation investment programs and major projects that will be funded in future TIPs to meet the MPO's vision. It is required to be updated every 4 years and looks out at least 20 to 25 years into the future, and it must be a financially constrained document. The current plan, Destination 2040, was adopted in 2019, and we are now kicking off the development of the next LRTP to be adopted in 2023. The next plan will be called Destination 2050, extending the planning horizon year out to 2050 to coincide with other planning activities in the area, including MIPC's Metro Common and the Commonwealth's Global Warming Solutions Act. So I'll go through the schedule for the development of Destination 2050, and then I'll get into more details about each task. So as I mentioned, we are now implementing the recommendations of the current plan, Destination 2040, through our UPWP, TIP, and other MPO activities. The implementation of 2040 will be ongoing until the new LRTP is adopted in 2023. So the first step in developing Destination 2050 is to identify the region's transportation needs. And this includes two tasks that we're starting to work on now, developing the needs assessment for the region and conducting exploratory scenario planning to consider possible futures. So we'll be working on this through 2022. Then we'll revisit the vision, goals, and objectives using information that we have collected while identifying needs in the region. This work will also be ongoing through the end of 2022. And then we'll prioritize investments using the available federal funds beginning late in 2022 into 23, with final plan adoption in 2023. So as I mentioned, during the development of the new plan, the MPO will continue to implement the recommendations in Destination 2040 until the new plan is adopted. So in Destination 2040, the MPO revised its goals, which included strengthening the transportation equity goal and strengthening resiliency under the system preservation and modernization goal. So some examples include for equity, the goal and objectives were refined to focus on the potential impacts of MPO investments on equity populations. And we also added two new objectives to improve accessibility for people with disabilities and investments to support transportation needs of the elderly and youth populations in the region. So for resiliency, we strengthened the goal to include planning for the resiliency of the transportation system. And these revised goals were used to update the TIP project selection criteria, which are now being used in TIP development. And the goals were also used as a basis for the selection criteria in the UPWP. The Complete Streets program was revised to add dedicated bus lane projects as part of this program. The transit modernization program was established, and we proposed funding for this to begin in 2025. And just this year in the UPWP, the MPO established a dedicated resiliency program. Also last year, the MPO changed its definition of the major infrastructure program and changed the criteria for projects that had to be listed in the LRTP. So these next two slides recap the decisions that the board made on the major infrastructure investment program. So this slide shows the updated definition of the major infrastructure program. For roadways, it includes projects that meet at least one of the following criteria: capital projects on interstate highways, principal arterial ways and expressways, and all sections of roadways classified as principal arterial other that have fully or partially controlled access, and projects that cost $50 million or more. For transit, it includes projects that meet at least one of the following criteria: all capital projects that add new connections to or extend the rail or fixed skyway transit network, and all projects that cost $50 million or more. The board also changed the projects that are required to be listed in the LRTP to be those that are required by federal regulation. And these include projects that change the capacity of the transportation network, such as a new travel lane or new transit service, and also projects that are in the environmental process that use federal transportation funds. The board also chose to list additional projects at their discretion. For project scoring, the board voted to rescore all major infrastructure projects that have been listed in the LRTP when they are ready for programming in the TIP. And the board also voted on the assumption that a project will not automatically be programmed in the TIP if it is included in the LRTP. So all of this information that's been developed and used in the implementation of Destination 2040 will be considered and built upon in the new LRTP, which again is Destination 2050. So now I'll move on to the tasks for developing the new plan. So one of the first tasks, as I said, is to identify the transportation needs in the region through the LRTP's needs assessment, as well as through exploratory scenario planning. So staff is now in the process of revisiting and updating the LRTP needs assessment in order to establish the existing and future transportation needs in the region. We'll perform analyses using information from our travel demand modeling tools, which use existing population, housing, employment information, as well as the attributes of the transportation network, and then forecast that demographic information out 25 years and runs the model to identify where there may be future needs on the existing system. So any work on the needs assessment that we do over the next year will use the current demographic data from Destination 2040. Staff is currently participating on the statewide socioeconomic committee, which is developing the new projections out to 2050 using new census data. We're working with MassDOT, MAPC, and the UMass Donahue Institute to develop these projections. And once we have new projections, we will rerun any model analyses to see if our results have changed. We'll also look at analyses and recommendations from existing studies done by CTPS and other agencies and organizations in the region. And we will do outreach to organizations and the public to gather their needs. So as part of the needs assessment, we'll identify needs by the MPO's existing 6 goal areas, which are shown here on the slide: safety, system preservation, capacity management and mobility, clean air and sustainable communities, transportation, patient equity, and economic vitality. So exploratory scenario planning is the second way we will identify additional transportation needs. In exploratory scenario planning, we can look at possible futures that may occur in the Boston region. As you may recall, this summer, staff conducted the Big Ideas study. And as part of that study, we conducted a number of focus groups with the public to solicit their ideas for potential scenarios that we could explore as part of Destination 2050. So some of the ideas that we heard include looking at the future of remote work from home policies, transit expansion, resiliency of the transportation system, and what the population, housing, and employment might look like in the future. So we are scheduled to present input from this study at your next meeting on November 4th. The Big Ideas presentation will begin the discussion on prioritizing scenarios that we can begin to analyze. And that information can then be used to make strategy recommendations for the LRTP. So we'll get into the next steps on scenario planning as part of the November 4th presentation. So the next step will be to revisit and refresh the MPO's vision, goals, and objectives. Staff will make recommendations based on information that was collected through outreach and needs through the needs assessment. And once you have reviewed and made changes, we will ask for your vote to release the revised vision, goals, and objectives for public review prior to adoption. The next task is to prioritize investments for the recommended LRTP. This will begin in late 2022 through early 23. And this includes identifying the investment programs and the federally required major projects to be listed in the plan. It will also include identifying projects that meet the new definition of major infrastructure projects, although they may not have to be listed in the LRTP. So the first step is to identify the universe of projects and the universe of programs lists. The current universe of projects list includes projects that are shown here, projects that have been programmed in the LRTP and TIP, active MassDOT projects, projects identified as important for meeting the region's transportation needs as described in the needs assessment, projects that have emerged from studies conducted by the MPO and others, projects in MassDOT's capital investment plan, and projects included in the MBTA's Focus 40 and other projects identified by the MBTA. Universe of programs list includes investment programs that are considered for inclusion in the LRTP, as well as programs that include projects that do not have to be listed in the plan, like the complete streets and bicycle and pedestrian programs. So this slide shows the current MPO investment programs that were established in Destination 2040, along with the funding goals that were established for each. They include the Complete Streets program with a goal of using 45% of the MPO's target funds for this program. the intersection improvement program with a goal of 13%, bicycle network and pedestrian connection program with a goal of 5%, community connections 2%, transit modernization 5%, and the major infrastructure program where the board decided to allocate no more than 30% of its funding to this program. So after the universe of projects list is completed, the projects are evaluated using criteria based on the MPO's goals and objectives, much like that is done for the TIP. The LRTP selection criteria are more high level than TIP criteria because we may not have as many details on the project because some may not have gone through the design process yet. Only those projects that are sufficiently defined are evaluated, and then we will receive available finances for the LRTP timeframe from MassDOT, which usually occurs between December and February, and for this plan that will occur in 2023. Then we'll identify the investment programs along with the funding goals, followed by identifying the federally required projects that must be listed in the recommended LRTP. Then finally, the MPO will adopt the draft and final LRTP in 2023, and that includes analyzing the draft set of projects using the travel demand model to identify transportation equity and air quality and greenhouse gas impacts. The MPO will vote to release the draft LRTP for public review, and the comments will be addressed, and then the MPO will vote to adopt the recommended plan. So I just want to show the schedule again, just to show how all of the pieces of the LRTP fit together. Again, we'll continue implementing Destination 2040 until the new plan is adopted. We'll be identifying the region's transportation needs in the needs assessment and through exploratory scenario planning, working on this from now through 2022. Then we'll revisit the vision, goals, and objectives, again, going through the end of 2022. And then we'll prioritize investments using the available federal funds beginning late in 22 into 23 and final plan adoption in 2023. So finishing up, I just want to outline our next steps. As I mentioned, Michelle Scott will be back at your next meeting on November 4th to present the findings of the Big Idea Study and discuss the next steps for exploratory scenario planning process. Staff will continue to participate on the statewide socioeconomic committee to develop the 2050 projections and allocations. And we will continue to update and refresh the needs assessment. We are now attending meetings to gather information on transportation needs in the subregions. So this slide lists the meetings that we have already attended, shown at the bottom, and those include the Minuteman Advisory Group, the Intercore, 495 Metro West Partnership, and Three Rivers Interlocal Council. And upcoming meetings shown at the top of the slide include the North Shore on Thursday, October 28th, the Metro West Collaborative on also on Thursday, October 28th, the Southwest Advisory Planning Council on Tuesday, November 9th, South Shore on Thursday, November 18th, and the North Suburban on Tuesday, December 14th. So we hope that the MPO members can attend your sub-regional meetings and participate in the discussions on the LRTP. And we also request that you spread the word that we'll be at these meetings looking for input on the plan. So with that, I'm going to open it up for questions and discussion, but I'm going to go back to the previous slide. We'll go back. And I'll leave up these dates for your information. And with that, I want to thank you.
Thanks,
and
Ann.
open it up.
Questions, comments from the members? Seeing none, Ann, I guess it was so well done that nobody has any comments or questions.
Well, thank you very much.
Next item on the agenda is member items. Are there any? Eric Barassa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to remind folks that we at 1 p.m. we do have the ad hoc cost increase committee meeting where we will be discussing any of the public comments that we've received and sort of next steps about bringing this back to the full MPO board.
Thanks, Eric. Others? So I'll just remind people, our next meeting is November 4th. As Ann gave the commercial, one of the items will be the results of the Big Ideas study. So I would encourage everybody to attend if you can. Otherwise, Eric, you got something else you want to say?
Yeah, I apologize. I have one more members item. I just want to remind people that voting is now open electronically for the 4 open municipal seats on the MPO. If you have not received a ballot or your municipality has not received the ballot, please contact me. The staff just sent a reminder email out. We've sent it out on numerous different lists to municipal planning staff, as well as our list of mayors and town managers, administrators, and select boards. But please contact me if you feel like you do not have the ballot, and we can get that to you.
Thank you, Eric. Other announcements, member items? One final thing, I'd like to commend staff today for a lot of very detailed presentations that were also designed so as to not take more time than needed. It was a really good balance between brevity and information, and we got through a lot of work today. Good job, everybody. Saying that, can I get a motion in a second to adjourn? Please state your name for the record when making the motion. Eric Barassa.
Eric Barras, I make a motion to adjourn.
Lynn Diggins.
Leonard Diggins, motion to second the motion.
Motion having been made and seconded. Without objections, we are adjourned. Hope to see everybody on the 4th. Thanks, everybody.